everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm LYNDALL STOUT. We have word this week of freeze damage in Oklahoma's wheat crop. To learn just how widespread it is, here's SUNUP's Dave Deacon and our Extension small grain specialist, Dr. Amanda Silva.
I think we all remember that freeze that we had a few weeks ago, and Amanda, it has impacted the wheat crop across Oklahoma.
Yes, it had. So I visited some fields in last week, and the freeze damage is starting to show in some wheat areas.
When it comes to freeze damage, just for the non-ag producer, what does freeze damage mean to a wheat plant?
So the freeze damage, I guess the severity it depends on the growth stage of the crop. So when that last freeze came in, most of wheat in Oklahoma was at blooming stage or flowering stage. So that is the most sensitive stage of the wheat crop to freeze. So that can mean that the grain will not be formed, that there will not be pollination, and direct impact on grain yield.
You have some examples of some potential freeze damage on those. What kind of walk us through what we have there?
Yeah, so here I have two different heads, right? So here we are seeing some white tips in the ounce. So this indicates that maybe the flower parts have been compromised. So I really recommend producers, if they are not sure whether their crop is suffering a freeze damage, they can try to open up the flower and see if there is a grain forming. So here I open up at one, and you can see that there is grain forming. So in this part of the head, we are seeing that it did not suffer from that freeze damage, and it will produce grain. But when I look here, I see that there are some brown, like pale color anthers. So this means that grain will not be produced. So basically this part of the head is sterile. And here we are seeing a head that is completely white. So this, it's a complete loss.
So we're going to be doing some virtual magic through the magic of the internet. We're going to bring portions of the usual Lahoma Field Day virtual this time. Yes,
so this is very exciting. So we'll be recording our varieties and also the field experiments from different specialists at OSU, and hopefully we'll go live and people can ask us questions while we walk through our research. So that's very exciting.
It's a changing time we live in.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amanda Silva. And for more information on all of that, visit sunup.okstate.edu.
Hello, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. Things have been tough for Oklahoma ag producers this spring weather-wise. Dry soil in the panhandle, a significant freeze, and now 2 weeks of damaging hail. Hopefully things will look more promising for our summer crops. Rain moved across the eastern half of the state this week, adding to areas that were already moist. Amounts started from less than 1/10 of an inch in central counties and increased moving east with 3.2 inches recorded at Clayton. Planting of summer crops such as soybeans and milo are in full swing in the west. Soil moisture, as seen in this 4-inch % plant available water map, is pretty good. The western panhandle continues its drought run, and unfortunately, a few dry spots are showing up in Roger Mills, Greer, and Jefferson counties. Numbers in the 70s and 80s, such as seen at Woodward to Payne County, are probably ideal for planting. The eastern half of the state will have to do some drying out before getting back into some fields. Soil temperatures are about where they should be this time of year. This map shows 4-inch 3-day average temperatures under sod. They are mostly ranging in the low to mid-60s for most of the state as of Wednesday morning. Now here's Gary with the newest drought maps for the state.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, April's in the rearview mirror and we look forward to May. Hopefully no big freezes like April had, and hopefully a little bit more rainfall in the west, because drought is starting to look a little bit more ominous across that part of the state. Let's take a look at the latest drought monitor report and see what we have. Now, no real new drought per se. We still have that severe moderate drought out across the western panhandle, but we do have more areas of abnormally dry conditions spreading out into northwest Oklahoma and even into parts of central Oklahoma, as you can see from the latest map, going over to Kingfisher County, up into Harper County, down into Woodward County. Those are areas with that large increase in abnormally dry conditions that we're concerned with possibly seeing drought develop if we don't get some good rains through the rest of spring. So we can see the April rainfall amounts. Lots of good rains across eastern Oklahoma, of course, parts of north central Oklahoma, and even a little swath of good rains down in the south central Oklahoma. But for much of western Oklahoma, out in the panhandle, it was generally an inch or less in some cases. So those are the areas that desperately need rain. Remember, April's a big rainfall month for Oklahoma, and we missed out in a lot of areas. We can see those areas of deficits from the departure from normal rainfall map from the Mesonet for April. Again, that area in west central through central Oklahoma, about 2.5 inches below normal, so that's pretty significant for April. But lots of deficits across the western half of the state, even extending in some parts up into north central and into the east side of I-35. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Dr. Alex Rocateli joins us now to talk about, of all things, crabgrass. Alex, there's kind of a love and hate relationship with crabgrass.
Exactly right. That's how I would define it. Crabgrass in row crops is a terrible weed. Everybody knows that. But when it comes to forage, crabgrass is a very good forage. It can produce high amount of forage, and also with good quality during summer. That's a delicate time to produce forage. So that's why we have that kind of relationship.
Let's talk about some of the research that you and the team have done. There's actually a few varieties that you've looked at.
Yes, that's true. Right now in Oklahoma, we have about 4 or 5 crabgrass varieties available for forage. And in the last 2 years, we had evaluated them in Grady County, Chickasha. And yes, crabgrass is a tremendous forage. Like in the last 2 years, we could produce about 3.5 to 4.5 tons per acre total season of forage, and the quality was very good to excellent. It ranged from 19% crude protein to 16% and a TDN value around 60%. That's everything that a producer might be looking for their cattle.
For producers who may want to consider crabgrass as a forage option, how do they get started?
I would say that right now is the best time to seed crabgrass. End of April until mid of June is a good time to seed. If they really want to go to and start seeding crabgrass, I would say first thing, soil sampling. Make sure that your pH is higher than 5.8. Even if it's 5.8, I would say lime and raise it up to around 6.2, 6.3. Apply P&K according to the soil analysis, and then we can think about prep the seed bed. Seed bed would be like we do for alfalfa, a very firm seed bed, and when placing the seed, crabgrass is a very small seed like alfalfa, so we need to place it like no more than 1/3 of an inch at the soil, into the soil, and after we need to press with something for we have a very good soil seed contact. So that's what I would like to say if somebody really wanna establish a crabgrass.
So as it grows then, how about guidance on grazing and haying?
Right, so I would say that for grazing crabgrass, you can start grazing crabgrass when it gets in growth at least 6 inches of growth, but I would say you can leave grow as much as 12 inches and so start to graze. At 12 inches, we are gonna have a good amount of forage, and also still we're gonna be holding a good quality on the grass. So that's why I would say if you can, postpone for 12 inches, and when grazing down to 3 inches. Don't go lower than 3 inches. Crabgrass is an annual plant, so differently from Bermuda grass or even alfalfa, it doesn't have any energy underneath in the soil to regrow. So it really needs that remaining leaves and stems on the ground to catch up in regrowth.
You and your colleagues have a fact sheet about crabgrass in rotation with graze out wheat.
Yes, actually crabgrass looks like that fits pretty well in a system when we finish grazing out wheat. It's gonna start to grow and it's gonna fill it up all the summer, that during the time that we are gonna have a fallow in a winter wheat system, normally what happened here in Oklahoma. So if you are considering a grazing out system and in that same field you would like to have some forage during summer, consider reading that fact sheet because we give a good information on how to make this system happen.
Okay, we'll check it out. Thanks a lot, Alex. And for a link to that fact sheet, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
The weather's warming up and parasites are becoming more active. Justin, what are we seeing as far as internal and external parasites?
Yeah, with any time we get into the springtime in Oklahoma, we're going to see a rise in internal parasites. And for cattle especially, when anytime we have good green pastures, we're going to have good parasites as well. So one thing you need to consider as you get a good pasture green up, that's a good opportunity for parasites to really increase. And so you need to make sure you're deworming those cattle with something or have some kind of parasite management program.
What are some of the indicators that a producer should look for in their animals?
Yeah, you know, when we think about an animal that's infested with parasites, a parasite's going to kick that animal's immune system in overdrive. So the classic telltale sign is what we call bottle jaw or swelling of the lymph nodes. And so what's happening is that parasite is signaling to that animal's immune system that it's got to fight this infection off. And so you'll see this swollen area right underneath, and then in general you'll just see less thrifty animals. They're not as energetic. Maybe they're laying down when everybody else is grazing. The other thing is they may isolate themselves in severe parasites. Not only are you going to be dealing with internal parasites, you've got the external parasites that are coming on, and specifically we've got two main ticks that are getting on cattle right now. One is the Gulf Coast tick that gets on the ears of cattle. A lot of producers see that, and especially spring calves. When we see those in spring calves, you'll see sometimes severe infestations. The biggest thing about the Gulf Coast tick is that you need to try to treat those animals if you can. And sometimes it's just a matter of carrying a little spray bottle with you to treat those calves' ears as you're working those or tagging those as you're out in the pasture. The other tick that we're starting to see is the Lone Star tick, and it's coming on right now, and it's going to become more active all the way through pretty much into fall. So when we treat an animal for ticks, you know, there's several different options. Some of the options are like some of your deworming products have ticks on the label and activity against ticks, but it's not going to provide long-term control. The other option is to spray that animal. Now, when we spray an animal for ticks, it's not exactly like how we spray it for flies. When you spray an animal for ticks, you want to really get a good product coverage. And that means you want to try to spray that insecticide or that caricide where those ticks are. And so sometimes the best thing is to put them down a chute or in an alley where you can kind of restrict those animals and get a good coverage. And again, probably the most popular method of treatment for ticks are pour-on type products. Right. Pour-on products have been around, and I would say it's the majority of our products that are available for tick control. They're easy to use. All you have to do is pre-measure it out and pour it down.
And you have a series of fact sheets and other reports available online too, right?
Yeah, we have a fact sheet on ticks, and we have some other resources that are out there that we can share at any point in time through Extension. we have certain things that we've developed through the master cattlemen as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Justin Talley with Oklahoma State University. And for more information on that, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, the meat processing plants have been hit hard by the coronavirus. So Derrell, talk a little bit about like what we're seeing this week in regards to this, some of the slaughterhouses across the nation.
Both beef and pork processing facilities and poultry to some extent as well have been hit really hard the last 2 to 3 weeks with kind of a rolling wave of worker impacts from coronavirus, of course. And so we're seeing plants that are either totally shut down or so much worker absenteeism that capacity is reduced, or they're taking obviously a lot of steps in those plants to try to space out workers and stagger shifts and those kind of things. All of those lead to significant reduction in the ability to process animals and maintain our meat supplies.
So speaking of meat supplies, how are the consumers being affected by this?
Well, we are actually probably going to see some legitimate shortages, if you will, at least temporarily, in the meat industry, both beef and pork in particular. A month ago we had some cases where there wasn't enough product in the grocery store, but that was just a logistical issue. It was a bottleneck. We had plenty of product. This time we actually have a reduction in product. So, for example, in the beef industry in the last 3 weeks, we have produced about 300 million pounds less beef than we did at the same time last year.
We spoke to Paul Beck a couple weeks ago about some of the impacts that it was having on cattle producers then, and producers not able to sell some of the cattle that they had and how to keep them longer. What are the impacts now that coronavirus is having on them?
It's the same thing, but much more exaggerated. So now we're, with the reductions in slaughter that we're seeing, fed cattle are backing up every day. It's very expensive to maintain those animals once they're ready. But that's what we're having to do. And then, of course, that just sets off a chain reaction back up the system for the rest of the cattle in the feedlot that are coming along. And then feedlots, if they're not moving cattle out of the feedlots, they're not placing many cattle because they don't have any pen space. So that impacts the feeder cattle markets. And so on down the, all the way back up the chain, we're seeing those ripple effects in the industry.
So I know it's really hard to predict, but do you know how long we're going to be in this situation?
Well, we don't know, obviously, but if we can, go through the next couple of weeks, maybe we see the worst of these impacts. It may take a couple weeks after that before we would get all the plants back up line. One of the questions we have longer term, though, is that with the changes we're having to make to make these plants safer for workers and so on, we at least for the foreseeable future, we probably do not get all that capacity back. So the bottom line is it may take several months for beef and pork industries to catch back up, if you will, on the slaughter, especially on the beef side. And so we could be looking at impacts much of the rest of the year.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
As we're into the month of May and certainly the breeding season for spring calving herds, those herds here in Oklahoma that plan to use artificial insemination, I think we want to visit a little bit about the timing at which we actually do the working of the cattle to do the insemination. You see, for years we used to talk about an AM/PM rule. In other words, if we saw the cow first in standing heat in the morning, we'd wait till the evening to breed her. Or if we saw her in standing heat for the first time in the evening, we'd wait till the following morning. That particular recipe works pretty well in areas north of here, up in the Minnesota, the Dakotas, and a lot of that particular data where that became a sound recommendation was done in dairy cattle in that part of the country. As we researched this further over time, we found there wasn't a lot of difference in conception rates if we just did everything at one time a day. For instance, if we saw a cow in heat in the morning, we went ahead and bred her in the morning. If we saw her in heat in the evening, we waited until the following morning. Here in Oklahoma, in the kinds of warm temperatures that we can have in even May and certainly in June, I think there's another good reason to reconsider this and do all of our breeding in the morning hours if possible. You see, research was done here at Oklahoma State University, and what they found was that cows out here on the range, not even being worked or gathered or messed with at all, the highest time of their body temperature occurred in the evening hours from about 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And that would be a time typically when a lot of us might consider bringing those cows up and breeding them. But this data really, to me, suggests that we don't do that. You see, these cattle showed an increase in body temperature of well over 1 full degree. And some of the data that has been done for years on dairy cattle has indicated that if we have that kind of an increase in body temperature at the time of insemination, we can have a loss in percentage conception rates of up to about 13%. So my recommendation is that if we're going to do AI on our cattle this spring, especially in some of those warmer days, let's make sure that we do our gathering and our AI in the morning hours. If you're going to plan a timed AI program, that's going to mean some extra planning to make sure that the actual time that you're going to work the cattle through the chute is in the early morning hours. Certainly try to be done by about 10 a.m. before the actual outside temperature begins to warm up quite a bit and changes the body temperature of these cattle. I think you want to really take a hard look at breeding them in the morning. I think you have a little more success in your AI program this year. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Farmers and ranchers have a lot of financial questions naturally during this time, and here to help us sort out some of those questions is Courtney Bir, our new Farm Management and Ag Finance Specialist for Extension. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's just kind of dive right in and talk about some of the major questions that producers have right now in Oklahoma.
Sure. So producers are really used to walking into their FSA office and asking people any question they have. We want to make it clear that the USDA is still there to support them, FSA is still there to support them, their banks are still there to support them. It just looks a little different. So instead of going in person, you need to call or use web resources to get that information you need.
Part of the challenge is it seems like there's new information coming out every day. What is top of mind this week?
Well, this week on Monday, the U.S. government added an additional $310 billion to the PPP loan program. If farmers are interested in that program, they should talk to their lender about that. It can be forgiven, but there's very strict rules in place to have forgiveness. So talking to their lender, deciding if that's the right loan for them would be the first thing to do. Another thing with an existing loan is if a farmer has a marketing assistance loan, an MAL, those loans, the maturation date has changed. So instead of having a maturation date of 9 months, it is now 12 months for some commodities. So they should call their FSA lender and see if their commodity has that sort of loan that's been extended.
So bottom line, read the fine print and be sure to ask questions, check in with FSA frequently, right?
Yes, FSA or your bank or whatever lender that you're using. If you need to consult a lawyer, that's another option. Just make sure you're asking questions and not diving into anything that you're not sure about. We have gathered together fact sheets that range from decision making during difficult times to managing farm finance issues and kind of looking at the health of your finances.
Thanks a lot, Courtney. We'll see you again soon. And for a link to the resources that Courtney mentioned, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Oklahoma producers are out in the fields planting summer crops, and wheat harvest is just about 4 weeks away. But Kim, let's stick with summer crops. What are producers planting this year?
Well, let's start with wheat. The producers have about 4.3 million acres of wheat planted as compared to 4.2 last year. In the United States, total is about 21.7 million acres for hard red winter wheat compared to 22.4 last year. If you look at cotton, it's projected that they're going to plant about 680,000 acres, 640,000 last year. If you look at the U.S., 13.5 million acres, and about just the same as last year. Corn, 400,000 acres for Oklahoma, 370,000 last year. The United States is increasing those planted acres from about 90 million acres to 97 million acres. And if you look at soybeans, Oklahoma, 550 million acres, up from 465 last year. The U.S. at 83.5 million, up from 76.1 last year. So you see more planted acres this year all the way around. And it's because better planting conditions.
You know, as I mentioned, it's hard to believe that wheat harvest is just about 4 weeks away. What are analysts predicting for wheat production?
Well, if you look at wheat production for the world, 28.2 billion bushels, that's a record. If you look at the United States, right around 1.9 million bushels, that's just about the same as last year. And Oklahoma, with all the hail that's been happening and the weather conditions, you're probably looking around 100 to 110 million bushels, about the same as last year. I think we're going to have a window in, say, June, July, say half of August. I think prices, if world production's as predicted, I think we'll probably peak out in those months. And if you look at the last 10 years, 9 out of 10 years we peaked in June, July, and August. I think it's the same this year.
So with all that in mind, when do you think producers should sell their crop?
June, July, and August. I mean, you look at the last 10 years, 9 out of 10. Now, prices, if we lose that world crop and the European crop's at risk, and if they lose it, prices are going to go up. Same with the Black Sea. They have no carryover stocks in those areas. They're very tight. Their crops are below average. Then we could see prices increasing in the fall. But, you know, odds are says June, July, and August.
Count on the odds.
There you go.
All right, thanks, Kim. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. Be sure to follow us on social media to learn details about the upcoming virtual wheat field day at Lahoma on May 8th. I'm LYNDALL STOUT. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.